The phone vibrated in the bag once again, and it was Barbara calling. She asked Noelle to drive to the gas station and pick up a puppy that someone had thrown away. Helping animals in need was a regular thing for Noelle. She had been volunteering for a year, providing assistance to animal protection organisations and regularly going to the shelter with food, medicine or money. As a veterinarian, she examined and treated her wards without delay. Sometimes, like today, she was asked to pick up and bring an animal that had been in trouble. "Noelle, honey, hurry up," Barbara's voice sounded on the phone. "Otherwise he'll create even more trouble. They're chasing him with a stick, but he runs away and comes back. Some bad man threw the little one out of the car right at the gas station." Noelle realised that she would find it difficult to catch the puppy on her own. The scared animal usually didn't willingly go into the hands, but there was no way out. She caught a taxi and rushed to the gas station. The scene that greeted her was both comical and tragic. A mongrel puppy, about 5 to 6 months old, was running around the station's territory. His long, thin legs flashed in the air, and a gas station attendant, armed with a broom, ran after him, cursing. "Stop scaring him," Noelle shouted. "You'll only worsen it. He's going to get hit by a car." "Let him get hit. I'm sick of chasing him," the fierce attendant gasped. But an accident could happen. Noelle tried to reason with him. The man spat loudly, reloaded his terrible curse into his verbal gun, and sat aside to rest. "Go get him yourself if you're so smart." The puppy hid behind bushes nearby and also seemed to have decided to gather strength. No matter how hard Noelle tried to lure him out, she couldn't handle it alone. Meanwhile, an old motorcycle pulled up at the gas station. A guy was driving it, and the girl decided to ask him for help. The guy didn't refuse. He rolled the motorcycles aside, and the two of them went to catch the disturber of public peace. Finally, the big-eared bandit was caught and placed in a carrier. It was difficult for him to fit in, and it wasn't worth keeping him there for long. Timothy, as the guy was called, offered to take Noelle and her catch wherever she needed to go. That day, one more zoo volunteer joined the team because since then, Timothy often came to the shelter on his old motorcycle. He helped feed the dogs and cats, cleaned the cages, and played with them. So he became friends with Noelle and soon became her boyfriend. Timothy named the puppy Bandit, and after all the necessary examinations and vaccinations, he moved to live with the guy at home. When Noelle came to visit, the puppy's excitement knew no bounds. The girl quickly became friends with Timothy's mother, Mrs. Oliphant, who had raised her son alone. They lived simply without much wealth. The only riches Timothy had was his familiar to Noelle motorcycle, inherited by his grandfather. Now he also had Bandit, their shared treasure and talisman. Mrs. Oliphant was a very kind woman who immediately treated Noelle as her own daughter. Being near the sweet, caring woman made Noelle feel warm and cozy, which was unusual for her since she grew up in entirely different, special conditions. Timothy was upset that Noelle didn't want to introduce him to her close ones, and she didn't want to explain the reason for a long time. And when Timothy made Noelle a proposal, he put her in a situation where she just had to introduce him to her family. Finally, she revealed the truth she had been hiding from her acquaintances and him for a long time. Her parents were very famous and wealthy people. Noelle lived separately from her parents in a small apartment. She dressed ordinary. She didn't engage in cool entertainment, nightclubs, or a burning life. She studied at a veterinary college, and none of her classmates and volunteer friends even suspected who her father was. When Noelle turned 18, she received the right to dispose of a modest inheritance from her grandfather. She received a small but neat apartment in a residential area, and a modest income from a deposit in her name. Thanking her grandfather mentally for such timely support, she dropped out of a prestigious university and went to study as a veterinarian. She wanted to gain practical skills and engage in her favourite business. Noelle was happy. She spent most of the money left to her by her grandfather on her pets. "Why did you hide this?" Timothy was surprised. "I understand if you were a member of a mafia family or the daughter of criminals. Your parents are just wealthy people." "You have no idea what you're talking about at all." Noelle was not amused. "You just don't know such people. They look at those who have a lower income and social status as plebeians, and this is arrogance, constant pomposity. You have no idea how difficult it is for me with them." Timothy grew up in love and trust, in a family where people always respected others regardless of their social status. It was wild for him to hear such things from Noelle. But Noelle continued her conversation. It turned out that she was the daughter of a famous businessman, Paul Fisher. Unlike their eldest son, the girl had always been the black sheep in the family, which they tried hard to repaint. When she left the second year of the most prestigious university and went to study as a veterinarian, her parents announced that they didn't want to know their daughter, and they wouldn't give her a penny until she came to her senses and returned to school. Can you imagine? Since childhood, I dreamed of healing animals, but they wanted me to become a diplomat, Noelle said. "Tell me, please, what is the passion of people to cut everyone into a comb? What do you need to be happy?" "I haven't really thought about it. What I want is for you to be by my side, for my mother not to be sick, for me to have a job that I love, for my friends to be loyal, for us to have a family and kids, and also for there to be no wars," Timothy replied. "Well said. But the values of my family are wholly different. I'm afraid to even imagine what will happen if they find out what I do besides studying at the veterinary school. Volunteers are ranked somewhere between beggars and layabouts by them, and they consider us almost the most useless people. They're ashamed of me, just because I had the courage to follow my dream, my own dream, not someone else's." Noelle was terribly nervous. She couldn't bring herself to tell Timothy that she couldn't introduce him to her parents, because both he and his mother were considered lower class by them. This thought was unbearably cruel and disgusting. Noelle literally hated her relatives for the way they divided people, worthy and unworthy of attention, kings of life and their servants. As long as she still lived with her parents, she constantly had to find excuses to avoid meeting decent guys whom her mother tried to set her up with. "Noelle, where are you running away to again, my dear? My friend Helena and her son will be here soon. Do you remember Craig? Such a charming young man. I think you should take a closer look at him. His family has 3 car dealerships in the city centre, a chain of car washes throughout the region, and real estate in Nice." "Yes, and Craig has a woman in every French town, Mum. I'm not judging, Mum, don't get me wrong. It's not my business, and let him live the way he wants." "But why are you trying to marry me off to him? You don't care if we're happy, as long as we have money, right?" 3 years had passed since Noelle started her independent life. She was finishing her studies. Her parents had almost resigned themselves to the fact that their family had its own black sheep and had placed all their hopes for decent, in their understanding, offspring solely on Noelle's older brother. He fully corresponded to all their ideas about what young people in their circle should be like. He graduated from a prestigious university. Then the father took him to work in his company, taught him everything, and prepared his replacement. In the last year, the father's health had deteriorated significantly. Unfortunately, he had no idea that his son would become a gambler and that in just a few years he would be proud of his daughter and curse the day when he decided to entrust his company to his son, who would soon lose everything that his father had achieved in his entire life. But that would be later, and right now, Noelle had no time for her parents and their moralizing. She loved Timothy with all her heart. They often rode together on the bike, and Noelle, clinging to her fiancé with all her body, felt like the happiest person on earth. However, Noelle still had an important conversation with her parents ahead of her. She needed to tell them about her upcoming wedding and introduce them to Timothy. To prepare for the conversation, she became a model daughter for a few days, attending family dinners and events she previously ignored. "Mum, I wanted to talk to you today. Our conversation will be serious, so don't plan anything for tonight. I've already invited my guest, and I want you to meet him without any extra witnesses," she warned her mother in advance. "Sweetie, are you bringing a groom?" Her mother's face showed obvious interest, which was immediately replaced by suspicion. "Is he from a decent family? Who is he? I hope we won't be ashamed of your choice." "Mom, please don't start." "I sense a catch here. Who is this man?" "Timothy. He's an ordinary guy. He's not a banker or a businessman. His mum and he only have a 2-room apartment in a residential area and an old motorcycle. But I love Timothy, and I really want you to accept him as your own." "Motorcycle? 2-room apartment? Does he live with his mother? What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? There can be no talk of any Timothy in our house, not even for a second. And this ragamuffin won't have his foot in our house." "Fine, Mum. Then I'm a ragamuffin too, just like Timothy. By the way, Mum, I've been a volunteer all this time. I did all kinds of dirty work, you know. I cleaned up after flea-infested dogs and treated cats with ringworm," said Noelle, who decided to set the record straight once and for all. From that day on, she never appeared at her parents' house again, rented out her apartment, and moved in with Timothy. After defending her diploma, Noelle got a job at a veterinary clinic and under the guidance of Mrs. Oliphant learned to bake pies. She enjoyed taking care of him and secretly dreamed of a baby who would look like her beloved. Time passed and they prepared for the wedding together. They worked hard and Timothy managed to get a good job as a manager in a good company. They were still far from having a lot of money, but they didn't dream of having a lot. They believed that together, with their persistence and hard work, they could overcome all difficulties. An unexpected call distracted Noelle from preparing dinner. "It's probably Timothy getting back from work. Apparently, he just wants to ask what to buy for tea. I'll ask him to buy a cake to celebrate the big news," thought Noelle and smiled at her thoughts. Timothy did not know yet that tonight there was a big surprise waiting for him. Noelle was pregnant. But an unknown number appeared on the phone. Noelle answered the call, and at that moment, Mrs. Oliphant saw her future daughter-in-law turn deadly pale and stagger, leaning against the wall. Noelle gasped for air silently, unable to speak. Mrs. Oliphant took the phone and heard, "He's in the intensive care unit right now. He needs urgent surgery. His life is in danger." Not understanding anything, Mrs. Oliphant asked, "Who are you talking about?" The voice on the other end of the line explained. Timothy Oliphant was brought by ambulance to the intensive care unit of the 3rd hospital. "You need to come to us as soon as possible. Apparently, he will need to be transported to the capital." The women had no time for fear and tears. the surgery in the capital would demand a big sum of money. So they both ran around the apartment, gathering everything valuable that could be pawned. Noelle took all the money she and Timothy had saved for their wedding and rushed to the hospital with Mrs. Oliphant. Of course, they were not allowed into the intensive care unit. Only after 2 hours of excruciating waiting, the doctor finally came out and explained that Timothy was hit by a car on his way back from work. He was riding a motorcycle and was cut off by a speeding driver. The injuries were all over his body, but the most serious was the damage to his brain. We assess his condition as extremely severe, critical. We provided emergency care to the victim, stopped the bleeding. I'm not certain that our neurosurgeons are competent enough to help Timothy. I would advise you to try to go to a clinic with one of the most experienced neurosurgeons in the country, but I'm warning you right away that it's a lot of money. So if you want to save the life of your son and husband, look for them urgently. Mrs. Oliphant burst into tears when she saw the amount of money required. Even if she sold the apartment, she knew she could not collect that much money in time. Please don't cry. I'll try to get it. I'll sell my apartment. It's more expensive. We'll save Timothy. But there was simply no time and strength to deal with realtors and all the formalities at the time, and Noelle decided to turn to her parents. She was ready for any humiliation before them, just so they would give her money on credit and help save the father of her future child. She stormed into her parents' house with her hair dishevelled, tearful and blushing. Her appearance scared her relatives, but they were too angry with their daughter to rush to her and ask what had happened. "Why are you bursting into the house like a crazy person?" her father asked sternly, as if nothing had happened. "Dad, I really need money. My Timothy is dying. He urgently needs surgery in the capital. Please save him. Give me money on credit, only on credit. I'll sell my apartment, I'll pay everything back, but I need it urgently, very urgently. Do you understand?" You left home. You abandoned your father and mother, and now you want to talk to us about money that you always despised. Her father's nostrils flared with anger. "You won't get a penny from me. Let your boyfriend die. It'll be better for everyone." Noelle looked at her father with disbelief. She was used to his arrogance, but she never expected to hear such terrible, soulless words from him. She turned to her mother and saw the cold indifference in her eyes. Her mother shook her head and said, "Your father is right. You have no right to ask us for money. You betrayed us when you got involved with that ragamuffin. We hope your madness will pass soon, and we're not going to interfere in that man's troubles." Her parents walked past her and left the room in silence, clarifying it for Noelle that pleading with them was useless. She already knew this, as well as the fact that she had lost her parents forever. She ran out of the house, realizing she would never return. "Nicole, my dear," a voice came from the garden. Under the open window of the living room, where the most disgusting conversation of her life had just taken place, Noelle saw her grandmother, the only person in their family whom she loved and who had always been on her side. "I heard your conversation. My son is very upset with you. He doesn't understand how cruel he's being, but he just wants you to obey his will," the elderly woman said, as if justifying her son. "And I don't want you to suffer. Look what I have." She handed Noelle a gold credit card that she always kept in a small purse. "Do you know that your grandfather left us an inheritance? Less for you," the old woman smiled slyly, "and more for me. He was a smart man and understood that young people couldn't be given fish. It's enough to give them a fishing rod so that they can learn to catch it themselves. But sometimes there are moments in life when we have to act quickly and help each other. I haven't spent my money. I haven't even withdrawn the interest. I don't need much. I think a decent amount has accumulated there. I don't need it, but you and Timothy have to live. Take this money and save your beloved."
"Grandma, my dear, may God bless you. I will be forever grateful to you,"
Noelle cried, kissing the elderly woman. Without wasting a minute, she jumped into the waiting taxi and rushed to the hospital, holding the card close to her heart, as if it were the most precious treasure. Her beloved's life depended on this piece of plastic right now. "You're too late. There's no hope." The doctor's cold voice stopped her in the corridor. "There's no point in calling a helicopter. It won't make this flight. It's better to take care of the funeral. Most likely Timothy won't live until morning." Mrs. Oliphant sat on a chair in silence and stared at one point. She had no strength to cry anymore. She was in a stupor. But the doctor's words angered Noelle. "No, he won't die," she shouted, and pushing the doctor and the nurse aside, burst into the intensive care unit. She was looking for her Timothy. Ignoring the staff's attempts to stop her, Noelle burst into the rooms and wards until she found him. Timothy lay wrapped up, looking very pale. The artificial respiration machine provided him with oxygen. His heart was still beating, and he was in a deep coma. Even a non-specialist could tell that life was leaving his young body. Carefully, as if afraid to wake her beloved, Noelle approached and lay down next to him. His body was warm and familiar, but now so helpless and inert. Noelle hugged Timothy by the neck, brought her lips to his face, and whispered hotly in his ear,
"Timothy, my dear, live. Please, fight. Believe that you can hear me and put all your love and hope into every word. Timothy, my beloved, we need you very, very much. Remember, I promised you a surprise. So, you will become a father. Do you hear me? You will be a father."
Her voice became louder and louder until she literally shouted into Timothy's ear,
"Wake up, Timothy! I'm pregnant!"
And a miracle happened. Timothy heard her. The readings on the monitor began to change. His pulse and pressure increased, and his eyelashes twitched.
"Faster! Come here! He's alive! He hears me!"
Noelle shouted, calling for doctors to help. Everything started moving, and after a couple of hours, the grandmother's credit card paid for Timothy's transportation by helicopter. In the capital, the operating table was already waiting for him. Hours of waiting passed, with no guarantees of successful completion of the complex operation. Only Noelle believed that Timothy would not abandon them with the baby, that he would fight, and they would be happy together. She held Mrs. Oliphant's hand and calmed her down. "I believe, and you should believe too. Timothy is strong. He will fight. Now he knows we will have a baby, and he will try his best." Timothy survived. He literally crawled back from the other world. After a month, they were all back home together. Even the lop-eared bandit, temporarily left in the care of volunteer friends, was nearby again. He tried to lick Timothy's face, and his wagging tail spoke more eloquently than any words about how happy he was to see his owner again. Months of rehabilitation, the birth of the baby, and so much
joint effort. This year, although it was tough, once again showed Noel and Timothy how close and dear they are to each other.